So the young church in Thessalonica had questions, and Paul had answers. Written around AD 51, the books of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians are some of the earliest letters that Paul ever penned. In fact, other than Galatians, the two letters to the church in Thessalonica are thought to be the earliest written books in all the New Testament. So Thessalonica was a really important, prosperous port city. It was situated in an area called Macedonia. It's what we now know as the country of Turkey. It sat on a critical trade route known as the Roman Road, which meant that as the kingdom of God began to grow and flourish within the church in Thessalonica, the hope of Jesus could travel to the rest of the world. From the bustling ports of Thessalonica, the gospel could spread into literally every area of life. So 1 Thessalonians starts out with a greeting from Paul and Timothy and Silas. You see, those three helped found the church in Thessalonica only about a year and a half earlier. And so Paul's the primary writer, but it's plausible that Timothy was actually the scribe and Silas was likely a really important contributor. And all three of those men were spiritual fathers to the believers there. In fact, we read about what happened in the early days of the Thessalonian church in Acts chapter 17. Basically, it wasn't great. As Paul was initially preaching and building up the infant church, some of the jealous Jewish leaders there started a riot. They dragged Paul's friends out of their house and ultimately accused all the Christians there of treason. So as a result of that, Paul's time and discipleship in Thessalonica was cut really short. He ended up having to leave and head to Corinth, which is where the 1st and 2nd Thessalonians books were written from. Because Paul's time in Thessalonica had been so limited, he was concerned that he hadn't been able to adequately teach and model what it looks like to follow Jesus, so he did something about it. Paul sent his protege Timothy to them. And when Timothy returned, he came back to Paul with their questions, and they had lots of questions. You see, the church in Thessalonica faced a lot of persecution, and they desired answers to some of the most important questions in life. Questions like, how should we live? How can we hold on to hope when things are really hard? What are the end times going to be like? Like, how should we prepare for those? And maybe you've faced questions like that before. If so, I believe that Jesus wants to speak to you through these two letters. You see, one of the first things you're going to notice as you read them is that the two letters have two very different tones. 1 Thessalonians focuses on Paul's encouragement to the church and the hope that we have in Jesus. It focuses on how we should anticipate the final return of Jesus. Essentially, 1 Thessalonians is all about faithfulness and watchfulness. Now, 2 Thessalonians is a little bit different. The best way I could try to describe it is, have you ever played a game of telephone that by the time it comes back around, the words are like a lot different than what was originally spoken? That is the big reason that Paul wrote 2 Thessalonians. You see, Paul's own words regarding the end times were being misreported and misunderstood. Literally, the church was struggling and they were fearful that they had been abandoned by God. They thought they'd been left behind by Jesus. But the other reason that Paul wrote it, and this is maybe the most profound one given the state of our world today, is that Paul wanted to remind the church to not to live in a constant state of fear and not to sit idle and wait for Jesus to return, but to engage work and families and communities with a sense of purpose and a clear calling. You see, eerily similar to today, the world of the Thessalonians was full of political upheaval and catastrophes and economic disparity and death. It was ripe with rumors, full of speculation, and consequently people's hearts were full of fear. Does that sound familiar? You see, for the Thessalonians, some of it was legitimate and some of it was absurd, but they felt it nonetheless. And all those feelings and all the cultural realities that created them, those things have to bow down in the presence of King Jesus. 2 Thessalonians 3:3 says, "But the Lord is faithful, and he will strengthen you, and he will protect you from the evil one." Just like the believers in Thessalonica, we must face forward and we must follow Jesus. We must choose faith over feelings, truth over rumors, trusting way more in God's kingdom than the kingdoms of this world. So, because Jesus is faithful, we can choose to be faithful. Because Jesus is our protector, we can choose faith over fear. And because Jesus is our living hope, we can choose, like the Thessalonians, to live in hope.